Do you remember back in the debate, it was Romney versus Obama? And in the first debate, people say that Obama lost that debate. In the second debate, it was on domestic policy, if I'm not mistaken. And for the most part, it was kind of an even kill Obama. He won that particular debate from the people who were watching. The third debate was on foreign policy. Now, if you remember, in the other two debates, it was kind of Obama as we typically knew Obama. But in that third debate, it was Obama as a badass. He bristled. He was strong. But why? It was a foreign policy debate. It was strong because he was allowed to be strong in that context. People accept that their leaders need to be able to defend them. In fact, not just accept it, want them to. Weakness is not a virtue from the standpoint of leading a bunch of people, especially from the standpoint of leading a nation. He was allowed to be strong in that foreign policy debate because it's what people wanted, it's what people expected, and in that situation, strength was a virtue. I want to move on also to the Kennedy administration. These are 2 points. That was the first one. When John F. Kennedy was in the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a situation where Kennedy was literally at a standoff. The world almost came to an end with this notion that weapons, missiles, were put in Cuba in striking distance of the United States, and Kennedy drew that as a red line. How did that end? Khrushchev sends a letter trying to come up with a plan in order to kind of come back from the brink. What's important here is this notion of saving face. The only way that issue was going to be resolved is if both people could walk to their constituents and say, I was able to get this. And the other person can go and say, I was able to get this. And sell it to them as a win, or at the very least as a bargain. That happened with the missiles that were close, if I'm not mistaken, in the Ukraine, pointed at the Soviet Union, in the deal being to move the missiles from Cuba. Meaning both sides could go to their constituents and say, we were able to get this. They were able to save face. Both of those things are important to know and to realize when you're thinking about foreign policy and to thinking about the entanglements that we get into, the standoffs. And in the context of standoffs, I would like to talk about Iran. I've argued from day one that the only way for Trump to get any deal in this is for him to go back to the JCPOA. I've said that he has burned the moderates in the country by pulling out of the JCPOA and then blasting the country after doing so, especially when all of the other countries say that they were living up to the arrangements of the deal. My point and my argument was you burned the moderates. The moderates in the country were the ones that allowed that deal to go through in the first place. And when you pulled out of that deal, they have the same political pressures that we have in this country. It may be different in some degree, but the same political pressures. People are people are people, regardless of where those people are and the overlay that those people are functioning under. Meaning that in the same way that Donald Trump is in this country and there are people going after him, trying to get him, and you have people in the party that requires him, wants him to be strong. I mean, for fuck's sake, they tried to take him out the office when he said, I want to pull out of Afghanistan or I want to pull out of Syria. Strength is prized. Same pressures over there. You burn the moderates. Your plan of brinksmanship, of threats, of aggression weren't going to work because, again, you've burned the moderates. My argument was for Trump to get anything accomplished, he has to go back to the JCPOA. And what do you know? What do you know? It's been released that Trump had agreed with a 4-part plan, and so had Rouhani with a 4-part plan of removing sanctions in exchange for Iran promising to not go for a weapon. The details or the basics of the plan and outline of the plan effectively that the United States, Donald Trump, would roll back sanctions, and that Trump was on board for doing so. Now, there's reporting here that Donald Trump behind the scenes was saying, yes, I'm willing to remove sanctions, but in person or in public, not saying that, which created somewhat of a problem. If you're Iran and you're hearing that Trump wants to remove sanctions, your response is, great, tell him to remove sanctions. Trump, in his mind, is, we got to do this together. What's important here is that both of them, Macron assisting in this, were able to agree on the tenets of a 4-part plan, or just say the tenets of a plan in order to take them from the brink. And I'm going to explain to you why it fell apart. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats while we're here talking with one another. Take a look at this. This is Boris Johnson and Rouhani. And Boris Johnson, Rouhani, and Macron, Boris Johnson and Macron are trying to get Rouhani to talk to Trump. Now, the way the reporting is going on this is that a call was queued up with Trump on the other line, and Rouhani refused to talk to him. Now, Rouhani refused to talk to him because they've all said, everybody in that government, the Ayatollah, Rouhani, and the foreign minister, that we are not talking until those sanctions are removed. Trump put those sanctions on illegally, and we are not going to enter into any negotiations at all. None whatsoever, until he goes back to the JCPOA and removes the sanctions from 2017. How is that not a reasonable position? Everybody co-signed that you are doing what you were supposed to do, and the United States pulls out of the deal. Now, like I said, in doing so, you burn the moderates. And in burning the moderates, people like Rouhani, you've lost the capacity to have any sort of negotiation because, again, they have the same pressures in their government as you do in your own. And why is it not right for Rouhani to say, you pull out of the deal illegally, we're not talking to you until you go back to the deal? That's their position. I don't know how that position is wrong. The call was queued up. Macron tried breathlessly to get Rouhani on that phone call, and Rouhani would not come out of his room. He says, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not having that phone call. Now, here's the catch. The plan, basically, according to the documents, Tehran would agree Iran would never acquire a nuclear weapon and will fully comply with its nuclear obligations and committees and will accept negotiations on a long-term framework for its nuclear activities. It would also refrain from any suggestion and would seek genuine peace and respect in the region through negotiations, language that mirrors remarks made by Trump before the General Assembly last week. As part of the plan, the United States would agree to lift all sanctions imposed since 2017. Iran will have full ability to export oil and freely use its revenues according to the text. Now, the other part to this is the Iranian apparently ballistic missile program. And that even though that's not in the document, apparently that is something that is up for grabs also, or at the very least up for negotiation. Ultimately, in order to make this work, Trump would have to go back to the JCPOA in order to have any negotiations further. Why did it fail? It failed because Donald Trump was talking about sanctions again, or Pompeo was talking about sanctions, one of them, somebody in the administration. And also, Iran wanted Trump to go out first and say that he was going to lower sanctions before he did any of this. Meaning, before he put his name on a plan for some kind of negotiation, he wanted Trump to go out and say, yes, I am going to remove sanctions. And maybe however he was going to say it, but at the very least, Trump will go out and say that there will be sanctions relief. The French and Bojo wanted them to kind of go out together. Meaning, he wanted this to be simultaneous as opposed to Trump taking the first step. I got to be honest, Trump took the first step in order to pull out of the JCPOA. I don't see why he would not have to take the first step and going back to it. It's almost as if they want Trump to at the very least get a win in the sense that he pulled out of the JCPOA and he was able to get negotiations together. It's almost like Iran, in this case, lose. I know this sounds strange, But if you look at it from the standpoint of the original action was started by Donald Trump, and everything, all of the brinksmanship was started and pushed by Donald Trump, for them to walk out together, and makes it look as if Trump was able to get concessions, as opposed to Trump going back to the JCPOA, at which point they open up and then start talking about it. There's a slight difference between those two things. In the first case, Trump takes action, takes horrific action, bringing the world to the brink of a war. In the second case, they're coming out together, as opposed to Trump taking that action to go back to where he started. So in this case, instead of Trump going back to jump, Trump doesn't go back to jump. Both people go out together as if Trump was able to get something based on his actions. I could be wrong. That sounds a little strange. But from that point of view, it does look like Iran loses something in the process, as opposed to Trump going out first saying, yes, I'm going to remove sanctions. Also, on a secondary point to this, all of this is kind of ludicrous, right? Israel has all sorts of missiles, and they are belligerently hostile, belligerent in that region of the world. So this notion that Iran is the purveyor of all things bad is a little bit loony. Not just a little bit loony, extremely so. However, Iran wants sanction relief. And so they're willing, to some degree, to kowtow to this lunacy if it would allow such. Not to mention, they've said on more than one occasion that they weren't trying to get a nuclear weapon. Now, if I'm being honest, them trying to get a nuclear weapon would make logical sense in order to defend themselves, meaning you can't topple us if we have a nuclear weapon. It's kind of the North Korea issue. The moment that North Korea gets a nuclear weapon, all bets are off in regards to attacking North Korea, unless you can take out all of their nuclear facilities, and you know exactly that you can take out all of their nuclear facilities. Well, at this point, North Korea has nuclear, or has submarines that can fire missiles. So that gets a little dodgy. Iran can make the argument that we don't really need a nuclear missile. We could take out Saudi Arabia's oil fields in one strike, in which case we would essentially have the same effect of a nuclear weapon, if not greater, by plunging the world into darkness. So it depends on how you look at it, I suppose, on whether or not they need a nuclear weapon to protect themselves. Regardless of what that answer is, and despite the lunacy associated with all of this emphasis on Iran, they want relief. Rouhani is willing to deal. Trump was willing to deal. He was willing to deal. I was right. Go back to the JCPOA, and they'll be willing to talk. Until you do, nothing takes place. Garnome, the ties into doubts about Iran supporting this attack, mining the Strait. Iran isn't going to do anything to increase tensions and clear the ones. Yes, agree, Garden. I agree. Iran was putting forth a peace plan at the UN recently, trying to bring down tensions in that particular region of the world. Also, several things are true. Europe is associated with the United States, clearly. We're, Western allies and whatnot. Even with Donald Trump, for the most part, that has remained true. Europe does not want a war. That is also true. It is unclear to me on whether or not they entirely blame Iran for this. I suppose they don't entirely. By the same token, they have these ties to the United States where, lapdogs. But Europe does not want a war. If you think back, the last war that the United States was engaged in, be it Iraq and then the subsequent other countries, particularly the supporting the terrorists in Syria, refugees flooded into Europe and completely and entirely destabilized the politics of the European Union. They do not want a war. Part of the reason that Bojo and Macron are trying to work this deal out is not entirely that they love the Iranians, even though I suspect they know that Iran stuck to the deal. I suspect it's more so the havoc that it's caused in their various countries. They know. And the last thing they want is for that to happen again. I'll leave it here. I'm not going to keep this long. Like, share, subscribe. The threat in that region is not Iran. If you're looking for somebody that may take us to war, look for Saudi Arabia and look for Israel. And by the way, the hysteria over Iran, when you have a totalitarian state of Saudi Arabia, is astonishing. Go back and look at Donald Trump's speech at the UN when he first got elected. Everything that he said in that speech could have literally, as a one-to-one, pertained to Saudi Arabia. It's extraordinary. And yet, he will make that speech, hypocrisy and all, and it's almost like a parody of itself. It's so bizarre. But that's it. These guys were close to the deal, close to stepping back from the brink. And the only thing Donald Trump had to do was to allow the Iranians to save face by going back to the JCPOA. And he couldn't do it. No deal will take place until that happens. Mark my words. Like and share.